Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Adventures in Brain Injury podcast. My name is Kevin Ballister. I'm a severe traumatic brain injury survivor who is given less than a 10% chance of recovery. I am the creator of AdventuresInBrainInjury.com, creator of FeedABrain.com, and author of How to Feed a Brain, Nutrition for Optimal Brain Function and Repair, available on Amazon now. And this episode is brought to you by Revive Treatment Centers in Denver, Colorado, a multidisciplinary neurorehabilitation clinic that focuses on traumatic brain injury, concussion, neurorehabilitation, and neurodegenerative conditions, as well as autoimmunity, specifically neurological autoimmunity. You can find them at revivecenters.net. With me, as always, is my awesomely awesome co-host, Michelle Malberg.
Well, good morning, Kevin.
Awesomely awesome. I was going for alliteration. Usually the magnificent co-host, Michelle.
But, you're fabulous. I love it when you change it up and keep me on my toes.
So, let's do a little housekeeping. If you guys could support us on Patreon, patreon.com/AIBI for Adventures in Brain Injury. That's a great way to support us, like $1 or $2 an episode. You can also leave us a review on iTunes. That helps us reach more people and get this information out there.
Hey,
so
Kevin,
yeah.
I'm going to interrupt you because, we received this morning, I was doing some housekeeping, and we received a really flattering, uplifting thank you from an MD specialist down south who thanked us so much for our work because it helped him help his mother. And I actually had a tear in my eye thinking that what we're doing is having an impact on not just other patients, but patient providers, care providers. So I'm just going to throw that in there. You can carry on now.
Can we read that review?
Oh, I think it's, well, okay, what? Sure. Without naming names, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so
it's online.
No, it isn't actually. It's fresh. It's a freshie. So it says, Dear Michelle and Kevin, I just finished a block of ER calls and got hammered. It's finally dying down. Therefore, he has time to reply to us. Yes, to your words. It was a pleasure to join you and Kevin on the podcast. Take as much time as y'all want to roll out the work.
This is from Dr. Giulapoli.
Well, yes, but I didn't ask him if we could use his words. So anyway,
we'll cut all that. No worries.
Okay. So yes. So his summary is, what you're doing, it's great work, and may it continue to influence so many around the world like it has for me. Yeah,
that's beautiful.
I was really, really touched. And that leading up to this morning's podcast recording was really exciting.
Nice. Yeah, that's perfect. And today I'm really excited.
Yes, you are.
This person's just beaming light, amazing individual. I became a fan of her instantaneously. So why don't you introduce Miss Allie Miller, RD?
Yes, please. Let me roll the bio because you have already, you've introduced her and I've heard that contagious laugh. So yes, Ms. Allie Miller is an integrative dietitian, which I really like to emphasize. And in 2016, she authored the essential and very gorgeous cookbook titled Naturally Nourished, Food as Medicine for Optimal Health. And now in 2018, she's birthing another baby, a paper baby, the Anti-Anxiety Diet, a whole body program to stop racing thoughts, banish worry, and live panic-free. So exciting. Allie is an integrative functional medicine practitioner with a background in naturopathic medicine from Bastyr University. As a registered licensed dietitian and a certified diabetes educator, she has a super contagious passion for food as medicine and pours all of that passion into developing clinical protocols and virtual programs using nutrients and food as the foundation of treatment. Her food as medicine philosophy is supported by up-to-date scientific research, and boy, oh boy, is she ever on top of things. You are for a functional approach to healing the body. Allie's message has influenced millions through media with television segments, features in a number of magazines, specifically O Magazine, yes, Oprah, Women's Health, and Prevention Magazine. Her award-winning podcast is called Naturally Nourished, and she also has great influence within the medical community. Allie's expertise can be accessed through her website, Allie Miller, A-L-I Miller, rd.com. And you'll find her blog, podcast, virtual learning, and a whole load of other links to access her practice and resources. Allie, welcome so much. Thank you so much. And welcome to Adventures in Brain Injury.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here, Kevin and Michelle, and to be a part of the conversation and a part of your amazing podcast. So I'm stoked.
Oh, terrific. Well, it's a threesome then.
Sounds good.
Yeah, this is awesome. We had I met Allie at KetoCon last year, and that was really cool. Became, just as I said, just instant fan of her style, her work, her brilliance, her passion, all of it. It was really cool to just see how she moves throughout the world and has integrated her story into her passion. So let's talk about that. Like,
yes.
what brought you into this? What brought you, like, where were you?
Well, let me
background on naturopathic medicine.
Sure. Okay, just wait a minute, because I have to say, when I just hear a summary of your story, Allie,
yeah,
I have my mind entertaining myself with stereotypical images of a woman engaging in Greek plate smashing. This whole plan to heal your body in 2007 to raise hell in Texas, and this plate empowerment. So in my mind, I just see you wielding porcelain plates. Anyway, so
like that.
You're going to have to follow back on that because I don't know what you're talking about.
That's okay. You're going to get your neurons up to speed. They're going to be firing, and she's going to tell her story.
So I am, as you guys mentioned, a functional medicine practitioner, and I went to school. I finished my schooling at Bastyr University, which is a naturopathic college of medicine. And I went on to be licensed and registered as a dietitian, and then further licensed as a certified diabetes educator. And I got into all of this. I was a dancer, actually. So I was a ballerina. And this was like, all of my life leading up into college. And I went to the University of Iowa as a dance major. I was pretty locked and loaded within that path, liberal science arts world. And I started getting really into food and nutrition, and was starting to volunteer at the farmers market, and got really into sustainability as I think the first step. And at that time, I took a wrong turn in my adventure and also got influenced by PETA and FARFA and a couple different animal welfare organizations where I went vegan. And so this is back in like 2003. And I actually found Bastyr. Fast forward, I started learning about foods and their therapeutic elements, and started brewing my own kombucha and starting to learn. So there were positive strains within my plant-based diet. And I learned about Bastyr actually because they had a vegetarian cafeteria, and I was going to change the world by making people vegan. And so, dreams can change. Dreams can change. And so I was really motivated by that. And then when I got to Vestir, I actually went on to be certified as a raw foods chef, which was where my personal health took the most dynamic, terrible dip that it did. And that's where I was diagnosed with autoimmune disease. I think it was a compounding factor of both having a high amount of anti-nutrients in my diet, a high amount of, prior to going raw vegan, I was raw vegan for, I believe, 3 months. And that's when just everything kind of tanked in my system. But leading up to that, as a vegan, I was eating a lot of soy, a lot of gluten. I was eating seitan, which was like literally isolated gluten protein. And my body just was not having it. And in the same time, I was under really high stress because at Vestir, the number one naturopathic college potentially in the world, but definitely in America, I wanted to master all of my coursework. So I didn't just want to get an A on my biochem exam. I wanted to memorize the Krebs cycle. I wanted to master everything. I was taking every elective I could sink my teeth into, from therapeutic whole foods culinary coursework to identifying wild mushrooms and hiking through the forest and making my own medicine and tinctures. And I mean, it was just full throttle, high gear. And when I go in, I go hard. And as you can tell, and yeah.
That is hardcore.
Yeah, I think you got a little type A personality.
A little, yeah. This was necessary that I wrote a book on the anti-anxiety diet and HPA axis, which we will get to that, yeah. But so I'm burning the candle, and I'm malnourished, and
right. Actually, can I back you up? You said anti-nutrients, so let's talk about some anti-nutrients.
Yeah, so they're based on plants can't run, plants can't fight, and so when we're talking about digestion of plants, there are a lot of different compounds that block or inhibit, whether they are phytates, whether they are lectins. There are varied compounds of different plants that have anti-nutrient properties, meaning that they may have a particular vitamin, mineral, antioxidant that we speak to, but their bioavailability, is very low or limited at best. And so this whole concept, just using nuts and seeds as an example, we soak nuts to reduce that phytic acid. And in that soaking process of germination, we actually enhance the bioavailability of their nutritional density. And so there's a lot of, and when we look at nature, like squirrels are one of the primary foods that eat nuts. They actually, we joke about them like burrowing the nuts in their cheeks. Well, what they're doing is they're mixing the nuts with their salivary enzymes, and then they're burying the nuts. They don't consume those nuts for days. They actually pre-digest and inoculate and sprout the nuts before they eat them. And the reality is, if they were eating raw nuts without going through that process, they probably wouldn't be viable. And we see this across the board, like for instance with corn, which is still pro-inflammatory, but the need to mix it, looking at traditional food consumption and mixing it with things like lime to activate the enzymes and to reduce those anti-nutrients.
Oh, thank you for bringing that up. And
I want to say something real quick though, because you're not saying don't ever eat any phytates. Because phytates actually in tiny dosages actually strengthen our immune system and our system, right? But as a raw food vegan, you were overdoing it.
Oh yeah. I mean, talk about belly bloat. And my GI was not happy. And like I said, I wasn't doing the gluten at that time as a raw vegan. But I was vegan for 3 years leading up to that, doing a very high soy and gluten diet. So I already had some GI and thyroid distress. And the raw vegan diet just really ramped that higher as I became severely nutritionally deficient. And so I had always had Raynaud's syndrome from youth, and that was flaring. I was in Seattle, Washington for Festier, so cold, clammy weather, huge flares in the appendages, and there was other things going on like panic attacks, insomnia. And when I went to the clinic and did some advanced testing, they found that my ferritin was at a 3, which is super, super, super low.
Yeah, and that's on your iron panel. So
your iron storage.
Yes.
And you need your ferritin to be above 70 to actually grow hair. And if it drops below 40, you're going to have hair loss. And, beyond that, there's influence on thyroid activation and, of course, anemia. So severely anemic, had very low ferritin, and I had a positive ANA, which is anti-nuclear antibody. And that looks at basically the fact that DNA was spilling into my bloodstream, and I was having an autoimmune attack.
How did you even get up in the morning?
Chutzpah, vigor, personal drive. I think that's the problem is we can overdrive based on, passion. I think at that time was almost my lighter fluid in a negative way because I overdrove.
Right. So you're type A.
I was just going to say that.
Gets through a lot of this stuff, and it's the drive of that. But
yes,
yeah.
But you must have burnt at some point.
Yeah. So I mean, long story short, I was seeking treatment at the clinic that I was also working at as a student practitioner. And I was doing acupuncture sessions and taking some traditional Chinese herbs and started doing, of course, iron supplements. But I looked at the ND team and I said, I'm fine taking supplements. I understand their role, but I know what foods I need to be eating to address this. And I know what I need to be removing. And so, over that period, it started with adding first raw egg yolks to green smoothies, which progressed within, honestly, I think it was within a month or so. My husband was cooking a grass-fed steak on the cast iron, and I swear, like a cartoon character, I levitated to it, and he turned around, he was letting it rest, and half of it was gone. It was just super primal. I just went for it. And that going more Paleolithic at that time and ancestral really helped. And it allowed me to make peace with animal consumption with the whole snout to tail philosophy. So eating organs and being sustainable with my approach allowed me to create that mental peace that this can be done in synergy with respect and honoring the animal in the life cycle. And that really helped me because it's very difficult if you have an emotional disconnect with nourishing your body. And so I had to kind of come to terms with that to allow myself to really get into a state of using the nutrients that I was giving myself with food.
Thank you so much for that. Being an ethical omnivore is about look, I absolutely agree that CAFO farmed meat is unacceptable. That's just and CAFO is the factory farming that most meat in America is produced as, right? And it's terrible. But yeah, I love what you're saying. When we are humanely raising animals and then consuming all of them, nose to tail, not letting anything go to waste.
And saying thank you.
And yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Honoring.
Absolutely.
And for our audience, let's simply define CAFO. So a confined animal feeding operation. And growing up on a conventional farm here in Canada, I saw it all. I mean, feedlots surrounded me. There was some ranching still, but in my area, there was a lot of confined animal feeding, feedlots, we just call them feedlots, and all this green grass all over the hills, and animals confined to their feces in pens.
That's so crazy.
It just wasn't right to me while we were mowing grass and animals were locked up behind within fences. And so Ali, yes, you and I have a lot in common, and I can't believe as a ballerina, my dance genre was ballroom.
Okay.
Ballroom in Latin, yes. And I can't believe you were even eating as a ballerina. That's impressive, number one. But let's talk about the role of this stress and anxiety. You and I are both, type triple, quadruple A. The stress and anxiety on brain health and the whole body response, because I push myself, and people, they hear me on the podcast, they see me out when I'm out, and it's like, I'm on. I'm on. And then crash. So help me out here.
Sure.
Go for it, girlfriend.
So yeah, I mean, in my story, that was a big hit. And I think that it keeps revisiting. I mean, the fact that now I'm in Austin, I started my clinic in 2012. I worked in the medical center from 2009 to 2012. And then I ran my own practice, and it was to have freedom to practice functional medicine under my own conditions, right? And all of a sudden, I find myself, as I'm publishing my first book in 2016 and 7 months pregnant, wait, I'm being dragged by the vehicle of my life. Like, why am I not in the driver's seat right now? What's going on with this? I did this for freedom, ? And so that's when I shifted my practice to virtual for self-preservation and moved out to the hills here. And I think that we constantly have to do that self-inventory. So when I'm working with a patient and I'm talking to them about stress, I spend at least 15 minutes of my initial 90-minute consultation talking about stress to that individual and how their body physiologically responds to stress. So, a lot of times in our culture, we are awarded or we are put on a pedestal for multitasking or juggling all these things, or how do you do it all? And that's seen as a positive thing. We don't honor the time for napping. We don't honor the time for regeneration or travel or that reset in our current culture. And so when I ask people preliminarily about stress, they all kind of roll it off like, oh, I'm a working mom. I do this. Or, I'm a little stressed, or no, I'm fine. And then I start getting deeper into the layers of, do you clench your jaw? Do you notice neuromuscular tension in your upper shoulders and neck? Do you have irregular body temperature regulation, like cold or moist hot appendages?
Oh,
Do you notice palpitations or tightness in the chest? Do you deal with rumination of processing events that had happened prior, or anticipatory distressing of what ifs and racing thoughts? And so we go into the physiological, the neurological, and the psychological elements of stress. And at the end, you do that whole inventory. A lot of people find that stress is a big piece of the puzzle. And I find that anxiety is often the Achilles heel, if you will, in many people's imbalance of a gamut of disease states.
So your book's coming out in July. Could I access a copy early? I'm clearly in need. So talk about this Achilles heel and the 6 foundational R's that you write about.
Sure. So, there's it in my book, The Anti-Anxiety Diet. The whole premise of my work with functional medicine is always about getting to the root. So we're trying to determine what is the triggering event, and then what is the antecedents and the driving forces that are driving the signaling of imbalance. And when I look at anxiety, the first thing I think that comes to mind for most people is neurotransmitters. And we've dumbed it down to be that. And we've dumbed it down with our scope of highlighting the focus of serotonin with SSRI drugs. Mm-hmm. And we're starting to look at dopamine with drugs like Wellbutrin, or bupropion is the generic term, which, that works more on dopamine and norepinephrine. And then there are the drugs that are the SSRNIs, which are serotonin and norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors. Regardless, those just look at biofeedback pathways of neurotransmitters, and that's our only approach we have in allopathic standard medicine of managing anxiety. The issue is that we're not understanding or even looking at what neurotransmitters may be imbalanced, or how neurotransmitters are manufactured in the first place, or what building blocks make neurotransmitters. So in my book, I have 6 R's, and I look at elements that are foundational drivers to anxiety, either on the production pathways or the actual building blocks, or on the synergy of imbalance within the symphony of our neurotransmitters.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So
The other thing we're
Yeah.
not looking at is the neuroplasticity
absolutely.
of our network, of how we're creating the pathways in our brain to kind of choose the path of stress or the path of anxiety or the path of distress, right?
The wire together, fire together?
Yeah. Neurons that fire together, wire together.
Yeah.
Neurons that fire apart, wire apart. You know.
For sure.
Allie,
Yes.
tell us about that.
The 6, yeah. So I'll tell you the 6 R's. So they are. It starts with removing inflammatory foods, resetting the gut microbiome, repairing the GI lining, restoring micronutritional status, rebounding the adrenals, or recalibrating the adrenals if they are in overdrive mode, and rebalance. The publishers didn't like the word recalibrating, so we said rebound. And then rebalancing our neurotransmitters.
Aha. Okay. And then rebalance. I'm so glad that you're focusing on the adrenals, because in allopathic medicine, for some reason, they must be too small sitting on top of the kidneys, and they're overlooked. And especially, I think, with women and the multitasking and the push for a low salt diet. And low fat as well, and lots of industrial fats. Women are starving, and men too, but women are starving on this low salt, low fat, low neurotransmitter diet with a supercharged day. Start at 5, end at 11, and do it all over again.
So I have a patient actually that I met with at the end of my day yesterday, and he is a traumatic brain injury client that is in recovery. And when I started seeing him, his total cholesterol was under 120. His total testosterone, I don't know the number, but was tanked low. I mean, so all of his steroidal pathways were shot. And it was because of the PTSD and the suboptimal. I mean, he was beyond stage 3 adrenal fatigue. And so when your adrenals are so pooped, because they go in overdrive following brain injury, they're trying to output cortisol to have that steroid impact to reduce the inflammation. So they're just surging cortisol, and they're surging DHEA, and they're surging epinephrine, because the bells and whistles are saying help in the system. And so in that post-concussive syndrome or post-injury syndrome, it's so important to not overlook the adrenal glands. And it's interesting because he's a, I think an astrophysicist or something very, very, very intelligent, worked at MIT. And he used to have to work for only 2 hours on the computer and then would have to lay down. He was having a lot of vasovagal stuff and just so many different areas where couldn't walk more than a half a mile. And we're on our 5th year of working together. And he said to me, when I moved to my new apartment in the DC area, I was worried about it being located on a hill, because I was worried that would put me into fatigue slumps, and it would have to flatline, after getting up into my apartment for an hour nap. Because of the chronic fatigue following. And he said, now when I get on that hill, I lighter fluid up that hill. And it's just so cool to see when you understand the systems that need nourishment, and you're able to use advanced functional testing and be strategic, that you can modulate the body's function and go back into optimal thrive mode when you're addressing the areas of need.
So Allie, how long, these are extreme symptoms, but this man is not alone in North America. It's kind of funny. Our school, my son's at an elementary school, and the principals did an exchange, And over in France, it's a bilingual program. Over in France, they mocked her by saying, "Oh, walk like a Canadian," because it was, you know, I mean, just go, 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 go. And I mean, in Europe, it is so much different. You have a hot meal served at the school. You have a 2-hour lunch. I mean, there is time in the day, and it's built into the lifestyle. But here we don't respect that. It's, you know, eat on the go, and this man is not alone. So how long does it take? I know timelines were all individual, n equals 1, but when somebody is so fatigued, because I can relate to this person, and I'm overlooked by the medical system, and they just say, well, you know, you've got a fair bit of real estate missing from your brain tumor removal, and, you know, it's going to affect things. But the recovery time, when you start doing all of these 6 foundational R's, how long is a person looking at for recovery time?
It really, like you said, is so individualized, but generally speaking, if the practitioner is skilled enough to understand what that individual's Achilles heel is, or their weak point and driving force, you know, each stage of adrenal fatigue with strategic supplementation should take about 6 months of recovery. So for someone that is at stage 3, we're talking about at least 18 months, about a year and a half. Okay. Generally speaking, again, but the issue that I see, just like in allopathic or conventional medicine, is a lot of the functional practitioners today, they do an advanced module on leaky gut and then they go to leaky gut, or they do a module on gut dysbiosis and then they're doing a cleanse. And all of these things can be strategic tools, but understanding where to start is really important. You know, for one patient, I might start with a micronutrient test and look at 35 different vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants and start to work on nutritional supplementation on a strategy. For another patient, I might be looking at an inflammatory food panel as the starting point and strategizing, repairing their leaky gut. For another patient, we might be doing a stool test and starting to look at if they have pathogens or parasites or candidiasis or yeast overgrowth. So, you know, all of the outcomes may be the same goal of the end product of optimal function and recovery, but starting at the right piece is going to be really important as far as getting best bang for your buck with your work and also outcomes.
Well, and time, you know, people, I mean, we can do, I mean, your work is just brilliant. I love that you're addressing all of these things, and the gut health and pathogens are so overlooked, but you're not going to find that in a supplement bottle. That's got to be a test done by your practitioner, because you can't really turn around and look in the toilet bowl and say, figure out what is going on. So, and I do just want to emphasize how important it is to turn around and take a look at what's gone down, because it tells us so much.
Oh yeah, and the good quality stool testing now can look at things also like secretory IgA, which is a marker that we see reducing under anxiety and stress, and that is an indicator of leaky gut. You know, we can see, or it can be elevated in an acute battle state. If you do have overgrowth, a good stool test will also look at actually what is present in the microbiome, as well as on the good strains, as well as neutral or commensal strains and pathogens. And then if pathogens are found, a good stool test will tell you what best tools are going to eradicate. So it actually will test for resistance and reactance on both pharmacological tools as well as natural compounds. So for instance, berberine root, which is one of my favorite clinical tools. Berberine root is a fantastic antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal compound, and it also can have blood sugar lowering effects. It stimulates the liver for bile flow, so it can also help with absorption of fats. So that can be a tool. But for instance, someone with Klebsiella or someone with C. diff or whatever their strain is in one body is going to be more resistant or reactive to berberine than someone else will be to oregano oil or to caprylic acid. And so having an artillery of tools that is layered with specific clinical information is going to get the best efficacy versus throwing darts at the dartboard in the dark.
Yes. So this is where you're talking about how supplementation, targeted supplementation can be used and how it's individualized to people. Is there any supplementation that you recommend for everyone?
Oh yeah, so and I am a big fan of nootropics and the use of supplements to accelerate our health and also to protect our body, right? So when we're talking about stress in general and preventing burnout on the HPA axis, which I'm not sure if I've defined, so make me define that in a moment. but yeah, if we're talking about stress burnout on the HPA axis, adaptogens are one of the first line of defense for certain. And that's something that you can bring in whether you are over or under HPA reactive. So whether you are in adrenal burnout or adrenal excess output, you can benefit from the use of good quality adaptogens. And so in my clinic, we use a formula called Adaptogen Boost as an example. And that has cordyceps, it has Panax ginseng, and rhodiola. So adaptogens, by their definition, have to have no toxicity. And they work with high ORAC capabilities or antioxidant expression in the body. And they reduce the excessive output of the bells and alarm systems of our stress response, while helping us to also rebound from stress-induced fatigue. So they allow us to be resilient to stress demands and also recover from stress demands on the same approach. And they can have some level of energy support, which makes them very tonifying for the thyroid. So the thyroid doesn't have to oversurge to compensate from that secondary stress-induced fatigue.
Oh my gosh, Allie.
That's just one. Yeah, I totally recommend.
No, I mean, I'm sorry to cut you off. I just, thank you. Wow. I mean, if we could have our care practitioners working at this level, I mean, just think of how healthy and happy our people could be.
Well, yeah, and that's what I call, another way that I describe what I do is I call it upstream medicine, right? Yeah. So it's like it's upstream versus downstream. You don't wait for all of the symptom trends to show. You look for the underlying, and also you don't put all these roadblocks on symptoms of deficiency. So, for instance, I may have a client come to me that is having hair thinning and is having insomnia and is starting to have elevations in blood sugar levels and is also having dyslipidemia. And, so they're on a statin drug, they are on metformin, they're on some form of a topical and maybe oral pill for their hair thinning, and maybe an antidepressant and a sleep aid, right? So they could come to me on 6 medications.
Oh, geez.
And, we look at that individual and giving them some adaptogens, which are going to aid in stopping the deficiency of their B vitamins and then optimizing their B vitamins and looking at maybe, honestly, literally biotin alone on a clinical deficiency level could be the driver of all of those symptoms in that individual.
Isn't that something? So let's go upstream and let's talk about this very critical axis, this hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
Yeah.
Because everything is connected.
Totally. Yeah. So, when I work with a client, like I said, I spent at least 10 to 15 minutes talking to them about stress response on their body and how their body is influenced by stress. And I go into this HPA axis in my intervention speak when I talk about their story. What I do after I do a long intake with a client is I retell their story to them. And I always honor them by saying, I'm going to attempt to retell the story of your life and your physiological current state. And, you have to tell me because you've lived in your body for 35 years or whatever it is, longer than me, if I'm off or on. But here's where I'm going to start. And it might be the gut, it might be wherever, but many people, like I said, with anxiety being that Achilles heel, many people's story starts with this HPA axis. And this is the fight or flight mechanism of the body. So we either have our sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system activity. And the body does not pilot at both ends of the spectrum. It's on or off, one or the other, really. And so when we are in this fight or flight sympathetic nervous system state, we are suppressing the activity of digestion. Remember, it's fight or flight or rest and digest. So when we're in fight or flight mode, our digestion, our relaxation, and our reproduction, which includes all sexual hormone function and many other hormones, are all going to be suppressed.
So just to clarify,
yeah,
fight or flight, that's going to be sympathetic, rest, digest, parasympathetic.
And may I add, this is what I learned going through my second brain injury. Well, it was apparent in the first to an osteopath who was doing some cranial sacral work on me. She taught me about the freeze response. So there's fight, flight, or freeze, and I was freezing. So and not freezing cold, freezing as unable to move, to process. And that was a huge key for me because I had all that sympathetic tone and very little parasympathetic response. And it was, and I was overwhelmed. I looked like a deer in the headlights. So tell us more about this.
Yeah. So let's go
states of the nervous system. Yes.
Sure. So let's go through each of the letters. So the H first is the hypothalamus. And this is the main regulator of homeostasis, or basically body regulation or balance or calibration in the body. So the hypothalamus plays a huge role on body temperature, on our sleep, on our energy, on our appetite regulation. That's actually where most of the leptin is targeting. We see a huge impact from the hypothalamus direct to the pituitary, which is the P of the HPA axis. And that in turn creates a lot of stimulation or precursor drivers for our hormone and fluid regulation function. And
fluid, let me interrupt you. Which fluid? What are you talking about with fluids?
So in the pituitary is where we make that antidiuretic hormone. And so that's going to play a big role on our not only blood pressure, but it plays a big role with thirst, fluid retention, fluid regulation, electrolyte balance and stability, nausea, and thirst. So a pretty big hit on that from a lot of symptoms that often get overlooked. So,
wow.
So the hypothalamus hits that pituitary, and then the pituitary, I think, is usually the unsung hero. We always talk about the adrenals, but the pituitary regulates that antidiuretic hormone, the pituitary, and that piece itself can play a role with like vasovagal syndrome, right? So like if you're dealing with issues with balance and you're dealing with issues with tunnel vision, a lot of that can be connected also to ADH.
Can you talk about vasovagal and what you mean by that?
Sure.
Allie, just give us the textbook lecture here.
Yeah. like, I don't want to get thrown too far off the P.
Right. We can circle back too.
This is so good.
Super quick.
Yeah. So basically, it can be a form of fainting essentially. Vasovagal is regulation on the vagus nerve, which runs from the brain stem to the colon, and it regulates our autonomic nervous system. So it's our involuntary nervous system function, and it plays a big role with the parasympathetic and sympathetic balance. There is bacterial elements that play a role with vasovagal, but it is largely connected, as I'm mentioning, directly to this pituitary and adrenal influence.
Wow.
Is that enough?
Oh,
yeah. So, okay.
I'm geeking out. Calvin, how about you?
I'm totally.
Well, it's just so interesting.
We gotta keep on moving.
Yeah. So the pituitary regulates that antidiuretic hormone, which could play a whole role with all of that, vasovagal, and it can also play a role, as I mentioned, with thirst. The pituitary regulates our TSH, so our thyroid stimulating hormone, which it's so funny because so many doctors only run a TSH when they're assessing quote unquote thyroid health.
Which
and
is
it could
just
be
crazy.
Yeah, it could be pituitary dysfunction. Typically, I can't say always, it very often is an overlooked abnormality. So yeah, TSH is made there. Our growth hormone is made in the pituitary. So that plays a big role with our bone health, our musculature, our sexual hormone expression. And then absolutely with sexual hormone, our FSH and LH are regulated there. So those play a big role with ovulation, as well as for men, sperm. So infertility is a big piece of pituitary dysfunction and distress on both men and women. And then oxytocin is the last one I'll say is made in the pituitary. So this is our bliss. It's what's released during orgasm. It's what bonds a child with their mother. It is a feel-good influencer that also could play a role with managing and regulating anxiety, because if that drops too low, we're not getting that recalibration or that perspective on our stressors being sources of joy. And so that can keep this kind of tightly bound influence in the body.
Wow.
So that's the pituitary. And then there's the adrenals. And, the adrenals are, like I said, typically the star of the show, where the pituitary is the unsung hero. And when we're looking at research, which I get really deep into in my book, we look a lot at the two drivers for adrenal stimulation, which is the corticotropin releasing factor, or CRF, made by the hypothalamus, and ACTH, made by the pituitary. And so when we're looking at research of things that modulate stress expression, those are often what we're monitoring. And those are the stimulants to the adrenals to put out their compounds from the adrenals, being DHEA, cortisol as the steroids. Aldosterone is also made there for blood pressure regulation. And that's where the salt comes in that you were talking about for sure, Michelle, where aldosterone imbalance can be seen if we don't have enough sodium for that to retain. And so with adrenal fatigue, we often need higher amounts of salt for sure. Mm-hmm. And then the adrenals also make, which many people don't know, they may have heard of the term adrenaline, but that's our epinephrine, norepinephrine, and dopamine. Those are called catecholamines, or stress responding chemicals. So for many people that are dealing with anxiety, it can be an imbalance of too little neuroinhibitory compounds, like the mellower outers in the brain, which would be serotonin and GABA, or those might be normalized and they might be making too much of the norepinephrine and epinephrine stress responders. So we can get in that panic, distressed, racing thoughts by either a deficiency or an excess. And also within that, it's a symphony. So, if one instrument is playing off kilter, you're not going to get that beautiful, harmonious expression.
All right, let me reel it in here. This is the awesome super geek out. Yeah. Definitely like the highest level we've done on things. So let's reel it back in a little bit.
Okay, yeah.
And let's talk about let's try to break this down into simple terms, what people can do right now. And I'm sure you cover all of this in your book as well.
Yeah.
Tell me about this.
So as far as like foundational starting points for regulating anxiety, or
let's the overview of what we're talking about here with the HPA. And then and breaking it down to what people can start doing
today, now.
So this access, like I said in the beginning, it can be an overdrive or underdrive. Mm-hmm. So in overdrive, we're talking about excessive output on the HPA axis, a lot of bells and whistles, a lot of alarms, and not enough of that rebound or balance or mellow out, right? And that creates eventually burn. And for people, if we're looking at kind of how we would fit into either end of the equation, I do have in my anti-anxiety book, each chapter has an associated quiz. And so that's my attempt to try to allow you to determine which is your Achilles heel, or which is your starting entry point into this puzzle. And so my quiz with the HPA thing looks at, are you over or under reactive? Because you're going to use different approaches beyond adaptogens, which can go on both over or under. You're going to use different approaches if you need to rebound the adrenals or if you need to mellow them out. And so there is definitely going to be different pieces of the puzzle. But across the board on a food-based level, what we can do is definitely look into things like high-dose vitamin C foods, which vitamin C is actually highest stored in those tiny adrenal glands in our body, because they play a huge role with regulating our cortisol. And for listeners, cortisol may be associated as a negative thing, if they've heard of like high cortisol drives belly fat, or high cortisol can have influence unfavorably on our sleep or our metabolism. But we need enough cortisol because cortisol also has anti-inflammatory effects and it has antihistamine effects. So, when we look at someone that says, all of a sudden I'm reacting to seasonal pollen and I'm dealing with rhinitis and a runny nose and dry eyes, or I'm flat affect with energy, or I'm dealing with inflammation where I needed to take or do a cortisone injection on a joint trigger point or something like that. Those are all the underperformers. And so kind of determining where you're at is important first before you start to look at intervention. But vitamin C is a great food as medicine intervention. We have on my blog a recipe called an adrenal rehab shake. So, we use that on also kind of both ends of the equation, if you will. And so that uses pure full lemons that you don't peel completely. So you get that white pith. It's called Nobalin. It's the furry stuff on the citrus. And that actually is very rich in bioflavonoids and a really good push to the vitamin C along with the zest. And we blend that in the presence of fat. Coconut milk is in this recipe. And we do that also with a little bit of turmeric to have anti-inflammatory support as well. And this is something that can really help to use food as medicine to support those adrenal glands in the state of recovery.
Nice.
Fabulous.
Yes.
Yes.
I've actually been making a grapefruit shake. And having some clients use this as well. Well, I'll just throw a whole grapefruit, like I'll chop it into quarters, but with the peel and the pith and everything, add water, and then I throw in N-acetylcysteine, which is used to create glutathione, which is the body's master antioxidant, and then the vitamin C really amps that up in that process. So you get the antioxidant, you get the vitamin C, and of course the pith and the peel is where you're going to get the majority of that vitamin C.
Yeah, and of course, hopefully, we make sure we put in, especially for our shake, a good, actually almost a teaspoon, it's a good pinch of Himalayan salt or Celtic salt to get those electrolytes and get that sodium regulation as well that we talked about, which is so important with clean eating.
It's so funny, Allie. I love speaking to enlightened RDs because anytime I have searched online for a recipe and it comes from an RD website, invariably I have to add a quarter teaspoon of salt.
Yeah.
These RDs who are conventionally trained and practicing, all their recipes are without salt.
And fat. You have to add at least a couple tablespoons of fat in there. So.
That goes without saying.
I want to bring that, bringing up fat.
Yeah.
How does ketosis fit into your clinical practice?
Yeah, so I am a huge proponent of the ketogenic diet, and I've been clinically using keto since 2009. When I started Naturally Nourished in 2012, I started an in-office ketogenic program, which was a 3-month program. And then just this past summer, I launched my virtual ketosis program. So the program entails functional medicine and tailoring your ketogenic diet to fit that. So it goes through the density of what is ketosis and the mechanisms and how to enhance ketone production. It goes a little bit nerdy into body fat metabolism and, of course, the mechanisms of things like MCT oil and the role of carnitine to help with fat metabolism in the body. And then each lecture within the 12-week program, it has 6 live lectures, and each lecture has a different focus on top of the continued keto process. So we have a leaky gut module, an HPA axis module, and then also some elements of like dining out and maintaining. But the ketogenic diet in general is very supportive of the neurological system. It is very supportive of metabolic health as far as maintaining lean body mass and burning body fat as primary source of fuel. And it is fantastic for dysmetabolic syndrome, including both diabetes and cholesterol. Sidebar that, yeah.
Yes, please.
The sidebar of that, yeah. I mean, there's constant, my dad messaged me because Apple News 2 weeks ago put out, they republished Cooking Light's article on coconut oil. And I'm like, when is the coconut oil argument going to go to bed, guys? So I just recorded a in defense of coconut oil episode on my podcast because I was just frustrated. It's very myopic. I mean, we look at the idea of demonizing saturated fats and coconut oil being one of those in general as being unhealthy is literature that is antiquated and looking at an elevation of LDL and stating that creates heart disease. And I do monitoring on my ketogenic clients, and often after the first year of keto, their LDL does start to dissipate, but within 3 months, their LDL particle size starts to become favorable. Mm-hmm. And in the change of making larger, buoyant LDLs and less of the small, dense, more dangerous LDLs, the type 3 and type 4 that create more particles, you actually, when you eat more saturated fat and higher fat in general, you make more of the large buoyant. And so if your doctor is just running a total cholesterol and LDL, triglycerides, and HDL, and they see your LDL go from 99 to 130, many of them that aren't educated will want to put you on a statin drug. And it's just not a 1 + 2 = 3 equation. And last year's presidential advisory referenced research studies from the 1960s and 70s. That just made me want to run my head up against a wall.
No, please don't. We need you. The coconut argument, the coconut oil argument is a big one. I mean, it's a traditional fat. We evolved around the equator, came out of the primordial soup and started, nourishing ourselves with those coconut oils. I have to just mention the other C word, canola oil, because it sadly is Canadian oil. And I mean, I've grown it as a farmer's daughter. The fields surround me. I mean, they're beautiful when they're in bloom, those yellow flowers, the blue skies, but to talk poorly about canola oil is irreverent up here. Would you please speak out to this?
Sure. And that was one of the frustrating elements is the report went on. This is last year, you guys. Why aren't we waking up? Well, I can answer that with my answer is corporate funding and infiltration of that. But
thank you.
I mean, the report recommended again canola, soy, and vegetable oils, and I'm like, what? So the issue is, I could go on forever, but it's a polyunsaturated fat versus a monounsaturated fat or a fully saturated fat. Poly meaning many unexposed bonds. That means many opportunities for oxidative damage. And to take canola oil is called rapeseed oil, actually, which is not a pleasant term, so we call it canola oil. But to take that rapeseed oil and convert it to a clear, non-color, odorless, compound creates a lot of hexalent, a lot of solvents, a lot of toxic byproducts in that cleansing of the oil itself.
Yes.
Not to mention the glycophosphate residue, be that 90+% of it is genetically modified and has high amounts of Roundup and pesticides applied to it. So
Calvin, can we keep her? I love her.
I know.
It's a neurological terrible. I mean,
it's a terrorist.
Yeah,
it is. We're poisoning our own people, and that's what upsets me so much. And then, you've really, I know we can't keep you forever, though we want to, but, you've gone from the extremes of being raised as an omnivore to going exclusively to raw vegan to realizing the detriment and then coming back to ethical omnivore. And, when I look at what we are consuming for fats, the animals in the CAFOs are being fed these grains. They're not even
omega-6
grass.
The ALA that they get in grass.
And like you say, those grains are full of oils that are contaminated.
Right.
So it's we're really poisoning ourselves from both sides. It's
and you know what, Michelle, I always talk about this. It's a term, biological magnification. So we acknowledge that. Yes. We acknowledge that with fish, the larger fish, more mercury, and that's biological accumulation or magnification. And I always say, if you can afford, if you have to budget, yes, I want you to consider the 30 dozen plus list from the Environmental Workers Group. But I more importantly want you to eat clean protein. I really need you to eat clean, grass-fed, pasture-raised protein for that reason that there is that bioaccumulation and you're getting the downstream effect, especially if there's growth hormone involved and other toxins for certain.
And especially clean fat from animal sources.
Yes,
because that's where the toxins
bioaccumulate
is in the fat.
So
speaking of the fats, you have a virtual ketosis program launching for the third time.
Yes.
In May 15th. Tell us about that.
So like I said, it has 6 live classes. It has a private Facebook group, and it comes with, the bundle option comes with 2 ebooks. One is called Ketogenic Kickstart, and that has my protocol of how to do the ketogenic diet, which is very unique to many things that you would probably read. And it talks a lot about research and ketogenic myths in that Ketogenic Kickstart. So it talks about the cardiometabolic influence. It talks about the neurological influence, the influence on the thyroid and the sexual hormone expression. And that's in one ebook. And then the other ebook is Eat Fat, Get Skinny. And that's all recipe. So that's all food as medicine focused. So you get both ebooks. You participate in the 6 live classes, or you can watch the archives and the private Facebook group. And it's over a 12-week period of time. And I'm super stoked to do this 3rd round. We've had so far 17 physicians participate in this program.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So
when you guys were talking about that dissemination and downstream influence of information, I have a couple endocrinologists. I had a rheumatologist in this last round.
Oh, that's perfect.
A couple GPs. Yeah. And they're the truth is in the keto pudding, you guys.
Is there a little bit of liver?
Which is in your recipe book,
right? Absolutely.
Keto pudding, I love it.
Coconut milk, cacao, gelatin, panna cotta,
That's what I'm talking about.
I'll take a second serving, thank you.
Yeah. So it's really awesome. It's very empowering. And even if you've been doing keto and you're feeling good, but you just want to learn more about functional medicine, I think that this is an awesome program. If you haven't successfully become keto adapted, this is a great program. If you're curious about carb cycling, this is a great program. So we hit all of that. And, like you were saying earlier, Michelle, about that transitioning within my personal diet, I take that perspective with everything. And one of my favorite mantras to use is doctrine creates disconnect. So if you get so locked and loaded, like I was with the vegan diet of I'm killing animals, I wasn't listening to the symptoms of my body. The same thing can happen with keto, and that's the idea of, if you lock and load too strong, when are you burning out? When are you not giving your mitochondria fuel? Do you have to consider carb cycling? Or, are you someone that performs really well on a continued keto tight, less than 30 total grams of carbs a day? And everyone has to listen to their body. And we really guide you through the program on what could be right for you and how to assess that, so that there's not guilt and shame in your process. It's not black and white. It's fluid.
That's
I
beautiful.
really appreciate that. People ask me, they're like, so how many grams of carbohydrates do you eat? I'm like, I don't know. Well, I really don't know. Like, it switches, it changes. I eat what I want to eat. If I feel like having something with carbs, I have some with carbs,
And that's the beauty of listening. And Ali, let me underscore, bold type, italicize, shameless eating.
Yeah.
Because especially for women, there's a lot of emotion attached to this food. And then, with the ethical movement, I'm all for ethical animal rearing. But we do have to realize their place and our place in the cycle. Oh, Kevin, I want to keep her.
I know.
Oh,
Well, is there anything else you would like to share with our listeners?
Let's see. So I think we talked about, I would just emphasize, from today's conversation, the role of, as we alluded to, the role of the adrenal gland and that HPA axis in your brain rebound and recovery, because those steroidal building blocks like pregnenolone and cholesterol are so essential. And we know that because the brain predominantly being made up of cholesterol, of course. So using a high fat diet is a great tool. I would definitely encourage checking out my ketogenic virtual program and working with your practitioner or getting a copy of my book to learn more about how you can empower yourself with your gut microbiome, your leaky gut, and then the systems that communicate with your central nervous system and your enteric nervous system, right? That connection of that superhighway of the brain-gut axis. And I think that that's where we start to really see thriving. When we're hitting all 6 of my foundational R's, you're going to be optimizing and thriving in your body again.
Cool. So where can people learn more about that program?
Yeah, so the virtual ketosis program, I will send you guys a link for your show notes. My website, again, is alimillerrd.com. And we launch May 15th. And then my book comes out in July. But on my website, there's tons of resources. We have a dysbiosis and candidiasis cleanse called Beat the Bloat. We also have a 10-day detox, which is super important with, like you mentioned, the NAC and glutathione contributors as supplemental supporters and liver gallbladder support, and just a good jumpstart for focusing on qualitative eating and cleaning up the diet. And then we have also, of course, our blog and podcast on there. So I think that's a great place to start.
And let's just note that all of those recipes are under the blog category.
Yep. And then in the Naturally Nourished Cookbook. And so what I do with my recipes, I always include a food as medicine focus. Good. So, there's always going to be the empowerment of the featured ingredients and how those nourish and heal your body. So in the anti-anxiety diet, we have like the lime and the coconut fat bombs. And so, those talk about the nourishing compounds in there, the combination of the lime zest for vitamin C for adrenals, and then the caprylic acid, bacterial and yeast fighting compounds in the coconut oil. So you get to learn tidbits of information with each recipe. So when you continue to use those ingredients in other dishes, you maintain that empowerment and you're able to strategically use food as medicine.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
It's the way it should be. Food as medicine.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, wow.
Thank you. We're gonna keep doing this. You're here in Austin. I'm looking forward to hanging with you more. So yeah, thank you so much, Ali.
Have a wonderful day, a blessed day, and we'll be catching up.
Sounds good. It's my pleasure. I'm so happy to be on. And just check out the site for more info. And I'm happy to talk again anytime.
Wonderful. Thank you. We'll take you up
Cheers.
on that. Bye.
Bye.
All right. Well, see, I told you, Allie Miller's just kind of amazing.
Beyond amazing. Beyond amazing.
One of my favorites. I tell people, I'm like, hey, have you heard about Allie Miller, registered dietitian? And they're like, sometimes people are like, yeah. And sometimes people are like, no, who's that? And I'm like, don't worry, you will.
You will, exactly.
Yeah.
That is for sure. She's fabulous, just
Yeah.
fabulous. And I have this quote that after my first brain injury, I put on my wall in the office. So 2011, I wrote on a sticky note, it says, "The road to good health does not have a drive-through lane." And when I think of our conversation with Allie, it just so perfectly sums everything up. I mean, she's been down most paths, and as a busy triple A, double, quadruple A personality, she's probably taken all the shortcuts, but there just isn't. You gotta have good food.
You can't medicate your way out of a bad diet.
That I love that quote too.
Or exercise your way out of a bad diet, or yoga your way out of it, or meditate your way out of it. You just can't.
No,
You can't do it. So thank you guys for joining us on this episode. If you'd like to sponsor, get in touch with us. Sponsor at feedabrain.com. We have pre and post roll sponsorship opportunities for you. Also, if you'd like to help us, go over to Patreon and leave us a tip. That's patreon.com/AIBI for Adventures in Brain Injury. And if you'd like to support us without any monetary investment, but really help us out, go over to iTunes and leave us a review. They really help us. Actually, I want to read one here. It's from X-Ray Dean. Thank you for bringing this great information on acquired brain injury topics. Kevin is my go-to for cutting edge on this topic.
Hey.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much.
X-Ray. Yeah, that is terrific. Well, and along with the support we've got from the medical community thus far, it really makes me happy to get up and click into the podcast when we're recording, knowing that we're making a difference.
Totally. And I want to say, Dean, if you want to get, I'm assuming your name's Dean. If you want a free book, I'll send you a book. And for other reviewers, leave us a review. If we choose your review, I'll send you a free book. So get in touch with me. Reach out to podcast@feedabrain.com, and I will I'll send your address and we'll get you a book.
Cool, Kevin.
Yeah.
Very generous. that reciprocity.
Reciprocity.
Give a little and get a little.
That's what I'm talking about.
Well, thanks for hanging out with me again today.
Thank you, Michelle. Always a pleasure. And until next time, we'll catch you and all of you.
Have a great day, everyone.
You too.